Workshop watch. Here in the museum we build aeroplanes, restore cars and motorbikes, file, weld, hammer and tap, wonder, weld and plane some more. And they say that where you break an egg, chips fall. And that's what you're going to see here. I am really starting to think about what I else need for the airplane. Then I remembered that I still have to do the floor, so I'm going to tackle that now.
The plane's got a floor built from lightweight wood. Back and forth we go, measuring like we should. With the yardstick in hand, checking here then there. Slicing through the wrong, we toss away the spare. We'll try it once again till everything feels right. With the folding rule, we're working through sun's daylight. Lines drawn with a pencil guiding every cut. Not every piece is planned, but we won't get stuck. So small, we measure, cut, and fit. When it's snug and tight, that's when we commit. Drawings on the table, showing how it's done. Every edge and joint, together they become one. Back and forth we measure, finding what's in store. This plane's got a floor, crafted from the core. With every little detail, we're building dream in this rhythm of creation. We're a powerful team. Every little detail, we're building up the dream in this rhythm of creation. We're a powerful team. Back and forth we measure, finding what's in store. This plane's got a floor, crafted from the core.
Like everything else, the floor is then sealed with boat varnish.
Ago, the tale was spun. Libel varnish, the work's never done. Though the dragonfly's gone, we still find our way.
The boat varnish serves not only as a weather protection, but also as a relatively scratch-resistant coating against damage caused by the feet during entering the aircraft.
Protecting the beauty, it shines like a star. Every corner glimmers, it's a sight by far. Against yellowing shadows, it stands the test. Reflecting our smiles, we know we're blessed. With brush in hand,
course, as always when something is to be painted by hand, remember the film formation.
The world feels divine. So here's to the craft. Let's raise up a cheer for the beauty that lasts throughout every year. 100 years later, the story remains. With the best boat varnish, we'll break all the chains. Raise up a cheer for the beauty that lasts throughout every year. 100 years later, the story remains. With the best boat varnish, we'll break all the chains. We'll break all the chains.
After the floor in the first plane fits perfectly as intended, the second is of course tackled straight away. The parts are now waiting installation. The underside is varnished first. The upper side as just shown after the installation. I do this because the holes for the clamps are drilled in situ and should get some varnish too. Applying varnish to the underside afterwards is always a bit of a pain. Today I'm going to take you on a little historical excursion into the development and evolution of attaching the covering on Fokker aircraft. We will simply ignore the spiders for this, as they used a different construction principle for their ribs. But since the M5, that is the aircraft that later became what we know today as the Fokker E3 through the further development steps via the M14, the method was the same. And it was as follows. This is the wing rib of the Fokker E3 as I built it. It is based on the measurement of the last original Fokker E3, which is now in the Science Museum in London. In this rib we have a rib web made of 4 mm plywood, which gets its stability and rigidity from a wooden strip that is attached to the plywood web from above and below via a groove and is glued there. This rib cap strip had a width of 20 mm and a thickness of 8 mm. The covering fabric was attached to these ribs by gluing and nailing. For this purpose, half Tonkin tubes were nailed against the fabric from above, which created a certain contact pressure. The tube also prevented the fabric from tearing through the nail heads. In the further evolution, the Tonkin tube was later omitted and the relatively large nail heads were partly covered by fabric tapes. This design principle was used until the Fokker M22, the aircraft that went into serious production as the Fokker D5 as we know today. Then came the Fokker V1, which had a wing completely covered with plywood skin. And this was done differently there. And the way in which this was done was also used for the following aircraft, which were based on the experience with the V1 but still had fabric covered wings. And the first production aircraft of this new type was the Fokker triplane. The Fokker triplane had, as we can see here in comparison, significantly smaller rib caps, namely only 8 by 5 mm, In addition, the rib web was now only 1.4 mm thick. The fabric was nevertheless nailed further onto these smaller cap strips. This worked quite well even during the type tests and the load tests. During frontline operations, however, the aircraft were exposed to the weather. If the work in the factory was also not done properly, we had the shortcomings of poor workmanship coupled with the effects of the weather, which in turn meant that this design principle was not sufficiently safe. And so in October 1917, when the triplane was introduced at the front, there were two fatal crashes. One was Lieutenant Heinrich Gontermann on his Fokker DR-1 115-17 and Lieutenant Günther Pastor on 121-17. The reasons for these accidents were then investigated by the Central Acceptance Commission in a so-called crash commission, made up from army officers and Fokker factory employees. They wanted to know exactly what had happened, and the result was that although the construction itself was strong enough, it was more susceptible to faults in execution due to its delicate design. They were also susceptible to moisture, especially if the components in the wing were not properly impregnated, that is, treated with boat varnish. As a result, the Inspectorate of the German Army Air Service demanded some changes during the production of the triplane. Among other things, reinforcing strips. Also, that the relief holes should be omitted because moisture can penetrate the plywood and cause it to delaminate. This can of course have fatal consequences. One of the most complex changes for the current production was, and this was the first time that this was required by the Inspectorate of the Army Air Service, and subsequently also was included for the first time in the construction and delivery regulations for Army aircraft, that the covering could no longer just be nailed to the cap strips but had to be sewn on there. Fokker gave some thought to how this could be implemented. The Inspectorate of the Army Air Service demanded that he modified all already built wings according to the requirements at his own expense and equipped newly built wings accordingly. And so Fokker came up with the idea of sewing already built but not yet delivered wings, which were still in order, with the same stitching afterwards as it is done today for modern aircraft, by stitching with long needles through the top to bottom and from bottom to top, laterally past the ribs and then knotting the thread. A construction method that has proven itself and is still used today, especially on American airplanes. But they did it even back in those days. However, it wastes a lot of thread, which is carried as dead weight on one hand and is also wasted. Fokker then came up with the idea of doing it differently. He thought, let's take the existing wings and already built ribs, and then, I show it to you here in the camera, covered them with strips of linen, which was glued to one side only, folded over the rib cap strips with no glue, and was then glued on the other side to the rib web of the other side of the rib. This secures the cap strip further, and it can also be used to stitch the fabric skin via curved saddler needles. So this was done in the serious production of the triplane. In addition, the rib web in the original design was made of 1.4 mm plywood. After the wing failures and the demand that the holes had to be omitted, it was decided that only a few triplanes would have to be produced before the end of the production anyway, so the holes were left in and the plywood rather reinforced to 1.7 mm. The requirement that there should be no relief holes in the ribs was adopted for other aircraft models such as the D6, D7 and all subsequent ones. This in turn brings us to the D8, which in turn brings us again to the V40, which is what we are actually concerned with. And that's where we continue. The relief holes were later omitted from the D6, D7 and D8 onwards. This made it possible to make the plywood webs even thinner than in the original construction of the triplane with 1.4 mm. The D7, for instance, was therefore reduced to 1.2 mm. Towards the end of production of the D7, when the C1 was built, new strength tests at Fokker showed that it was possible to go down to 1 mm without compromising the overall stability of the rib in any way. This was then done, and we took this 1 mm as the basis for the reverse engineering of the ribs of our Fokker V40. But what I'm really interested in this very moment is the strength of the stitching on our V40. The construction of the ribs is now based on the latest method used by Fokker. Throughout the D6, D7 and D8, no more cap strips with grooves were glued to the rib webs, but 2 strips were glued and nailed to the left and the right of the web as cap strips. And to get the problem with stitching under control, one of these 2 strips became wrapped with linen strips in advance, then glued to the rib web. The covering could then be sewn or stitched to this wrapping with a curved saddler's needle. And that is what I'm doing here right now. To certify the aircraft, we have to prove the strength of the covering, which makes sense. It is not a common method today to cover the wings in this way, but because we want to make it historically correct and know that it has lasted in thousands of built aircraft in combat use, we will also prove the strength accordingly with this test, which the expert requires or wishes for. Let me show you here. We will stretch the fabric here as if it was a wing. 2 solid wooden beams as sparse imitations are sufficient for the test. We have sawn out 2 stable boards on the side in airfoil contour so that we can keep the fabric in shape. In the middle is a rib that is true to the original as it is in the wing itself. One of the rib cap strips is also wrapped accordingly. I'll get the other camera. As you can see, one of the cap strips is wrapped, so we can easily sew on the covering with a bent saddler's needle. When the whole piece is covered, it is then turned over and filled with sand on the inside, according to the expert's instructions. I'll include the weight specifications. He imagines 78 kilograms at the front, 79 kilograms between the spars and another 21 kilograms behind the spars. The purpose of the whole thing is to check whether the covering material will hold on to the rib via the Fokker stitching method when the lift pulls on it. Now I've shown this to you, and you can follow the construction progress in this episode of Workshop Watch. I'm going to finish it now and hope it was an interesting insight for you. You can see the load tests themselves in the next episode. I'm sure the practical tests will show that it all holds, and if it doesn't, then we'll all have something to laugh about.
Everything hangs by a thread. In the end, it's those fine threads that lift us high into the blue, like the old dreams whisper true.
Long thread, lazy girl, that's what Grandma used to twirl. We need that thread to rise. It's the only way to touch the skies.
Stitch by stitch, we find our way. With the crooked needle we sway, sewing easy, pure and bright, and not every third holding tight. Later we glide, wings spread wide. On that thin thread we take the ride. Cut to length, fast and strong, with every a stone beneath the moon. With nimble fingers, we craft our wings. When the sun shines, oh how it sings. We climb aboard, the bird takes flight, knowing we built this dream so right.
Safe as a child in a mother's embrace. Everything hangs by a thread in this space. In the end, it's those fine threads that gave us strength to soar ahead.
Later we glide, wings spread wide. On that thin thread we take the ride. Cut to length, fast and strong. With every heartbeat we sing our song.
A strip of fabric keeps it tight,
So no loose knots in our flight. 'Cause the fun would end too soon with knowing we built this dream so right.
safe as a child in a mother's embrace. Everything hangs by a thread in this space. In the end, it's those fine threads
That gave us strength to soar ahead.
After the fabric has been sewn onto the rib, rub a generous amount of dope through the thread into the covering fabric and the wrapping underneath, so that everything sticks together. Soak this 3 times thoroughly.
Erstaunlich, was Schaffensgeist hervorbringt. Hin und her und auf und nieder, saugst die Nadel immer wieder. Ein Tröpfchen Öl zur rechten Zeit, der Faden durch das Nadelöhr. Stich für Stich wird so aus Stoff ein Wunderkleid, mit dem wir unseren Flieger dann bespannen, um majestätisch in den Himmel zu gelangen.
A strip of linen is then placed over the seam to protect it, which is also saturated and then further coated while the wing is being soaked.
Dünner Faden recht umwunden, hält was ward gebunden. Einer alleine kann es nicht schaffen, doch viele Fäden halten es zusammen. Wunderwerke in Feinmechanik. Erstaunlich, was Schaffensgeist hervorbringt. Hin und her und auf und nieder, saust die Nadel immer wieder. Ein Tröpfchen Öl zur rechten Zeit, der Faden durch das Nadelöhr. Stich für Stich wird so aus Stoff ein Wunderkleid, mit dem wir unseren Flieger dann bespannen, um majestätisch in den Himmel zu gelangen.
As soon as the linen strip is properly saturated, the saturation of the covering itself is started. Everything that is now done on this test piece is later repeated 1-to-1 when covering the wing itself.
The workshop full of fumes of dope. Rich vapors drift through the air, pregnant with hope. In a workshop where dreams are born, rich aromas dance, air is warm. Fabrics hold the secret tight. Soak them well, let them shine bright, with harmony wrapped in every thread. A heart full of hope where ideas spread. The workshop.
It is not necessary for the test piece, but if it survives the stress tests, which I assume, I would like to have it as a showpiece in the museum, and I can try out in advance with some paint how the design of the color scheme will look on the original.
We can't do without a painter, turning the mundane into art. When the world wakes up in color, that's when beauty steals your heart. Sign painter, a craft of old, every brushstroke tells a tale. With love and care, the colors unfold.
Because we have just started the first load tests anyway, building components for it, we are also thinking about how to do this with the load on the seat for the aerobatic certification. Instead of the canvas seat, we have installed a 𝔬𝔦𝔰𝔬𝔠𝔥 seat in our special suspension. And of course, the inspector also wants it to be loaded accordingly. If I have it right in my head, according to the construction regulations for aerobatic airplanes, that's 80 kilograms assumed for the weight of the pilot, times 6, that is 560 kilograms, which the seat has to carry plus the associated safety. That is 776 kilograms total load, if I'm right. So we have to think of a way to get just under 800 kilograms into the seat to prove its strength, or the strength of the suspension. We first considered doing this directly in the fuselage, but then decided to carry out a load test until the actual breakage. So we won't be doing it in the fuselage, but will be simulating a fuselage segment with all the details. We will then load this segment until it actually breaks. We have already thought about how to get the load into the seat. It's not easy to get 800 kilograms into the seat. But we make it easy for ourselves and use a cider barrel like this one. It fits exactly into the seat frame. It is a 120-liter barrel. We get about 190 kilograms of sand into it. We will then build it up in such a way that we stack the remaining 600 kilograms on a pallet, which we will then place on top of the barrel. Hopefully, we will then have transferred the required load into the seat and the structure and into the overall construction in a reasonable way, and hope to prove the strength of the whole thing. So we'll build the segment and then take it to Steffen and carry out the load test there. Now that's all discussed. The church is getting on my nerves again. I've already told you that we are going to take the wing down next so that we can start covering the wing. But before we do that, Jerry, who is here on vacation, can get started and work out the covering, the cowling for the top of the aircraft fuselage. At the end of the day, Jerry, my good friend from England, manages our archive, and he is currently making a video series on YouTube that you should watch, which is about how the archive is set up and managed. The series is called Looking into the Archive. It might be interesting for you to see how we use the historical documents and their evaluation. There he is, by the way, Jerry. Regardless of whether they are photos or drawings, and how we can ultimately use them to create components for the replication of the Fokker V40. Here, for example, this strange 𝔚𝔬𝔯𝔦𝔰𝔬𝔮 is not a strange 𝔚𝔬𝔯𝔦 at all. This is actually not a pointless 𝔚𝔬𝔯𝔦, but these are important records, which he took, and he can now explain to us how he obtained those.
Okay, one of the things we are looking to do is to design the upper cowling for the V40 aircraft. Now, while we have some limited information, we do have a very good drawing. So this helps us to understand the shape of the cowling in particular, because it's not flat. It's got a kink in the front of it to actually go down to the front frame itself and to allow the engine cowl to sit over the top. So the drawing shows us this kink quite clearly. And the other thing we can look at is the photographic evidence. We have a nice photo of a side view which shows us this particular arrangement, this kink if you like, and allows us to see exactly how this thing is going to work in reality. So my challenge is to actually draw this particular cowling, but to fit it to an existing airframe that Achim has built. So that's my next challenge. So let's go off and do that. Achim, want to come?
Yeah, I follow you. I just sit here and watch.
My measuring stick. Modern technology. Middle. Awkward.
Jerry,
Yeah.
this is the measurement, because this fits exactly.
So this fits.
This was the template used to cut that.
So this fits that. So in theory, this gives us.
No, because that's wider.
I know, but it gives us the inner curve, though, doesn't it?
Yes, that's true.
What we need.
Yep.
We need that inner curve. We can use that to do the template up with. So that's going to be important.
And it provides you with this length.
Yes, it does. On the curves.
This measurement from here to here, flat out, is actually the width of the sheet.
Yes, true. So that's the width we should be measuring. Isn't the technology wonderful? Bits of fabric and paper, we can do almost anything.
All we need to build an airplane.
7.5. double check the length measurements. Should be 7/10 for the front. Yep, 7/10 for the front, 4/10 for the back. And that's measured from outside to outside, inside to outside. Okay, I think that's about it then for basic dimensions.
Devices. Anything you want to tell the guys?
Nothing needs to worry too much about anything else.
Tell it to them. Nothing to say.
Well, obviously the only other thing we have to be concerned about is going around
Those cutouts.
the struts, so we have to have the appropriate cutouts, so they sit flush on the longerons. So that'll all have to be done probably in situ more than anything else. So line the sheet up and then mark it accordingly.
So what we're now going to do is to use Jerry's measurements and create a master pattern directly from aluminum to cover the entire thing, because it would be a waste to use a cardboard box, a cardboard sheet that long. You just make a raw piece from aluminum and make that fit to the fuselage, and once that fits, this is the master pattern we used to create the two cowlings for those two airplanes. That's
That's the plan.
the plan so far. Sometimes the plans work, other times they don't. We'll see how that works out.
We've got plan B.
Yeah, which we have to think of.
Whatever that might be.
When we covered the stabilizer surface, I showed you that the control cables have to be fed through the fabric. To do this, these leather reinforcements are sewn on with the openings in them. Of course, we also have to do this here on the wing. As long as the wing is mounted and the aileron cables are in place, I can define this accordingly. I have shown you how to do this on a stabilizer by simply drawing the dimension on a sheet of paper. But there's another way, with a piece of index card, which I have prepared here. You can simply cut out the opening through which the control cable should fit. With this cutout, you can then place the whole thing around the rope and position it accordingly. The position then can be determined using distinctive points and lines, such as the inner edge of the rib here, the trailing edge of the spar there, or the wing aileron spar here. When the aileron is now operated, the cable moves and the angles change, and thus the position change. To make sure that the cable fits through without any problems, you can also try this now. Let me show you. As you have seen, this runs beautifully through the opening. You can now take the positioning and try it on the opposite side to see if it fits there too. If you have worked properly, it should fit there too. I tried it out and it fits. So I only need one template and not two. And no, that's not a given. It's all done by hand. The ailerons, the wings, the hinges, all your fit. There can be discrepancies, Even the two ailerons don't necessarily have to fit 100% the same, and the aperture may no longer fit. If you are concerned that you have not worked accurately, you should check this beforehand. In this case, as so often, it fits, and so I can use this template for the respective side. Next, the ailerons come off, the control cables are unhooked and the plane pushed aside so that the wing can be removed. We then start covering the wing. The individual fabric panels must first be sewn crosswise. The wing is not covered lengthwise, but chordwise. And there's a reason for this, which I will tell you about later.
Printed aircraft fabric, a tale untold, first of its kind, a story bold, crafted for fighters, a secret design, a pattern that shifts, in daylight it shines. Many call it lozenge, a name misled, but stills for cops.
As you can see here, I'm now starting to cover the wing. I measure the fabric directly on the wing. As you can also see, the fabric is not stretched lengthwise but across the wing. This has to do with the camouflage. Camouflage doesn't work very well if patterns are constantly repeated. The big disadvantage of pattern repetition is the fabric, which is made using the roller printing method, as the rolls always print the same thing after certain distances. Here you can see the spot that is repeated. If you were to cover the entire length of the fabric, it would be a constantly repeating pattern. That's why the fabric is not only laid crosswise but also is rotated by 180 degrees and offset. This is done so that as little of the pattern as possible is visually repeated over a large area. You want to break up the contour, not to draw attention to it.
Pattern that shifts, in daylight it shines.
This was also done during the First World War. There was another method where the sheets were laid on diagonally, so the offset was slightly greater and the effect even better. However, it has a major disadvantage in handling that I don't want to go into here. We do it the way it was done with Fokker. As you can see, this is the fabric of the underside. The fabric on the top is of a different, darker color. The individual panels are now sewn together first. The same is then done with the fabric on the top. The front side is then sewn together along the top and underside fabric. The wing can then be removed from the fuselage and we begin to cover the whole thing. This step follows next. Let's see how long it might take.
A vision so bright, rich with ideas, it dazzles the light. Printed aircraft fabric, a tale untold, first of its kind, a story bold.
I draw a straight line so that I can cut the fabric straight. This is helpful. You can do it with chalk or with a pencil.
The scissors slip, the lines aren't clear. A jagged cut I can't steer. The fabric frays like thoughts unwind. Straight and true is hard to find. Mark it with chalk, mark it with care, but the line fades, it's barely there. Cutting dreams with trembling hands, a perfect seam no one demands. Edges curl, the pencil smears. The measured mark disappears.
colorful thing, isn't it?
Betray. Mark it with chalk, mark it with care, but the line fades, it's barely there.
And at the joints, the panels are now sewn together with the so-called 𝔚𝔬𝔯𝔦𝔰𝔬𝔡. I'll show you that too. Vernäht. Das zeige ich dann auch noch.
Pfaff and Adler and Singer, they come alive. At the pedal, the little gears thrive. Whirring faster with a gentle touch. We sew with old machines, oh, they mean so much. Threads and twine, holding dreams so tight. A single stitch can't carry the flight, but woven together we rise and soar. Marvels of craft are what we can adore. Up and down we go. The needle dances a rhythmic flow. A drop of oil when the time is right. Thread through the eye, shining bright. Stitch by stitch, a miracle is born. From fabric's embrace, new dreams are born.
Bisschen aufwendig. It is a bit time consuming. After all, it's 6 meters of fabric which stretches all over the edge of the table. I'm not a professional seamstress. I can manage it reasonably well. Old grandma always said, if you think slowly, you have to drive slowly. Well, let's drive slowly then.
Our fate, one can't do it, together we create marvels crafted with hands so skilled, in the heart where artistry is filled. Back and forth the needles dance, whizzing softly. It takes a chance, a drop of oil, a guiding hand. Thread through the eye, a promise so grand.
The same process is then repeated with a length of fabric for the top.
Your craft has thrived, weaving dreams for both ladies and men, stitching the fabric where hopes come alive. Brave little tailor, today's
First, everything is pinned together with pins, neatly and congruently, but with the right sides facing.
From linen so fine, a wonder to behold. The green forest birds will envy your bold. First you pin each piece with tender care, securing the vision, a masterpiece rare. So with a rhythm
Ja, der spaßige Teil der Näherreite beginnt jetzt. Die einzelnen
The fun part of sewing is just beginning. The individual panels are now sewn together lengthwise in the direction of flight. It's relatively easy. It only gets interesting now when the top and bottom are to be sewn together along the edge of the nose, the leading edge of the wing. And to make sure this seam is nice and straight, I'm not a sewing pro, so I draw the line with a pencil.
Und zeichne die Bahn, an der genäht werden soll, auf
I
meinen
assume
Stoff auf.
you can see this clearly in this shot.
Prima. Dann wird es nachher auch schön gerade. Und das eigentlich Lustige ist,
The funny thing is that all my sewing machines are in my showroom, and because all my models are also housed here, it's funny balancing the 6-meter big bale of fabric through here. It's a bit cramped back here anyway. You can see my sewing machines at the corner. Historically, tough, of course. You've already heard it in the songs. And now I'm going to sew a 6-meter length of fabric in one piece. Let's see how that turns out.
Entlang der Nasenkante auf den ganzen 6 Metern. Mal schauen, wie das wird.
Well, in this case it's not possible to work with pedals. Everything is in the way down there, as you can see. It's quite a bale of fabric that has to be processed here.
Adler and Singer, they come alive. At the pedal, the little gears thrive. Whirring faster with a gentle touch. We sew with old machines, oh, they mean so much. Threads entwined, holding dreams so tight. A single stitch can't carry the flight, but woven together we rise and soar. Marvels of craft, oh, what we can adore. Back and forth, up and down we go. The needle dances a rhythmic flow. A drop of oil when the time is right. Thread through the eye, shining bright. Stitch by stitch, a miracle is born. From fabric's embrace, new dreams are worn. Covering our planes as they touch the sky. Majestic journeys where the heart can fly. Stitch by stitch, a miracle is born.
Und das war sie auch schon wieder, die Werkstattschau des Museums für Flugzeugbau und technische Geschichte in Weschenbeuren. Besuchen Sie uns doch mal. Jeden ersten Samstag im Monat von 9 bis 18 Uhr geöffnet. Museum für Flugzeugbau und technische Geschichte in Weschenbeuren. Wir freuen uns auf Ihren Besuch.